You've been told to be nice, to be agreeable, polite, compassionate, that kindness is a virtue, and that the world rewards the gentle. But Nietzsche saw through this illusion. He saw that behind niceness often lies fear, the fear of conflict, the fear of being disliked, the fear of becoming powerful. He knew that what we call goodness is often just obedience in disguise, that many people who seem kind are simply afraid to assert their will. And while you try to be a good person, the world is shaped by those who aren't afraid to offend, to challenge, to be real. This is not a call to cruelty. It is a call to authenticity, to strength, because if you confuse being nice with being good, you may never become who you truly are. And Nietzsche warned you, the meek shall not inherit the earth, they will serve it. You were taught to be nice, to smile even when you're hurting, to agree even when you disagree, to soften your voice, smooth your edges, apologize for your own intensity. And so, you became liked, but you also became invisible. Nietzsche saw this clearly, that much of what society calls goodness is really just self-betrayal, that behind the mask of niceness lies a soul slowly dying, not from cruelty, but from conformity. You may not have bars around you, but if you're afraid to be disliked, to speak freely, to say no, you are in a prison. And worse, you built it yourself. Why? Niceness often hides fear. Most niceness is not born from virtue. It's born from fear. Fear of rejection, fear of disapproval, fear of conflict. You tell yourself you're being kind, but often you're just avoiding tension. You stay silent, not because it's wise, but because you don't want to be seen as difficult. You agree to things that drain you. You nod when your spirit screams no. Nietzsche would call this a form of cowardice masked as virtue. Because niceness that hides truth is not noble. It is manipulation by omission. You aren't protecting others, you're protecting yourself from discomfort. And every time you betray your truth in the name of being nice, you teach the world to ignore who you really are. How people-pleasing weakens the soul. You think being easy to get along with makes you strong. But Nietzsche knew anything that weakens the self is not virtue. It is slow decay. People-pleasing is not love, it's emotional strategy. It says, if I keep everyone happy, maybe I'll be safe. But safety has a price, and the price is your authenticity. You stop knowing what you really want. You mold your words, your opinions, your presence to fit whatever room you're in. You become agreeable to survive, but you forget how to be real, and over time, your soul becomes hollow. Nietzsche would not offer comfort here. He would offer a mirror. Is your kindness a gift or a shield? If it's a shield, drop it. If it's a performance, stop the act, because your truth is more important than your likability. The silent rage of the agreeable. There is a hidden violence in niceness. Not the violence that explodes, but the kind that simmers beneath the surface. When you constantly suppress your needs, your anger, your boundaries, something inside you begins to rot. And that rot turns into resentment. You smile, but you're seething. You agree, but you're aching. You're praised as so easy to be around, but deep down, you want to scream. Nietzsche saw this as a sickness, a spiritual war, because when you are too nice to confront others, you eventually turn your rage inward. You hate yourself for not speaking up, for not walking away, for not being strong, and niceness becomes a slow form of self-abandonment. The world may thank you for it, but your soul won't. Escaping the morality of meekness. We are taught that meekness is a virtue, but Nietzsche saw it as a survival tactic, one crafted by the weak to keep the strong in chains. He called it the morality of the herd, a system of values designed not to elevate you, but to domesticate you. It teaches you to suppress your power, apologize for your ambition, silence your will. To be nice even when you feel rage, to let things go even when they eat at you. But this is not virtue, it is submission. Nietzsche would not tell you to be cruel, but he would tell you to be truthful. To stop mistaking compliance for compassion, to stop confusing niceness with goodness, and to start reclaiming the parts of yourself you buried to be accepted, because your life is not meant to be a long, quiet apology. Kindness can be holy, but when it's used to silence truth, deny power, or control others, it becomes something else entirely. Nietzsche understood that in a world obsessed with appearances, even our most cherished virtues can be weaponized. And kindness, for all its warmth, is one of the most dangerous because it can disarm you while it dominates you. This chapter is not about rejecting kindness, it's about stripping it of illusion so you can see what's real, so you can give and receive compassion that comes from strength, not fear. How culture rewards the obedient society doesn't want your power. It wants your cooperation, your willingness to fit in, to be liked, to not make waves. And so it rewards the nice, the agreeable, the compliant. You're praised not for your truth, but for your predictability. You're loved not for your soul, but for how little you disrupt the herd. Nietzsche called this the domestication of man, a process that turns wildness into politeness, conviction into compromise, power into politeness. It's easy to be rewarded when you obey, but what you gain in acceptance, you lose in aliveness. He would ask, is the approval you receive worth the silence it costs you? Niceness as social manipulation. We don't just perform kindness, we use it. As currency, as leverage, as armor. You're nice, so others will like you. You help, so others will owe you. You smile to diffuse the truth you're afraid to speak. This isn't empathy, it's strategy. Nietzsche would expose this, not to shame you, but to free you, because if your kindness is a manipulation, it will always feel hollow, and it will always collapse under pressure. Real kindness does not come from fear. It comes from strength, from sovereignty, from a soul that gives not to gain, but because it overflows. When empathy becomes self-erasure. Empathy is beautiful until it becomes self-erasure. When you feel others so deeply that you forget yourself. When you carry pain that's not yours. When you constantly ask, how do they feel, but never ask, what do I need? This is not compassion. This is disappearance. Nietzsche believed that true love, even the love of others, must begin with fidelity to the self. Otherwise, your empathy becomes martyrdom, and your martyrdom becomes a quiet form of self-harm. To reclaim your power, you must learn to say, I see your pain, I honor it, but I will not abandon myself to carry it. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are the geometry of real love. The guilt trap that punishes the strong. Have you ever noticed how the stronger you become, the more truth you speak, the more boundaries you set, the more people accuse you of being selfish? That's not an accident. It's a cultural script. One Nietzsche recognized as moral blackmail. Guilt is used to tame the rising soul, to shame those who step into their power, to turn strength into sin. You're told you should be more considerate, be less intense, not make others uncomfortable. But here's the truth. If your truth makes people uncomfortable, that's their growth edge, not your failure. If your boundary is seen as selfish, maybe they were benefiting from your self-neglect. Guilt is a leash. Cut it, because no one who truly loves you will ask you to shrink. Being good is easy. You follow the rules. You do what's expected. You avoid offense. You fit in. But being great, that's dangerous, because greatness demands you break the script, that you speak when silence is safer, that you walk alone when the crowd clings, that you become too much for a world that rewards staying small. Nietzsche never asked you to be good. He asked you to be true, even if that truth offends, disrupts, or isolates you. Because in a world addicted to niceness, authenticity is the first casualty, and only the brave rise beyond it. Why true strength isn't afraid of rejection. You were taught to fear rejection, to treat it as proof that you've done something wrong. But Nietzsche would say, rejection is not a punishment. It is a purification. When you stop being nice to be accepted, people will leave. When you stop agreeing to keep the peace, some will resent you. When you start choosing truth over harmony, you will lose the comfort of conformity. But what you gain is worth more, because rejection clears the room of those who loved your performance and makes space for those who can love your essence. True strength is not loud. It is unapologetic presence. It says, this is who I am. Not everyone will stay, and that's okay. Trading comfort for truth. Comfort is the enemy of becoming. It lulls you into sameness. It whispers, don't change, don't speak, don't rise. But Nietzsche knew, truth is rarely comfortable. Truth stretches you. It makes others uncomfortable. It shatters illusions you've built your identity on. So most people settle for being good because good is rewarded. But truth often costs you everything that's false. The question is, what are you willing to lose to become who you really are? Comfort, approval, niceness, or your soul? You can't keep both. Becoming dangerous with integrity. The word dangerous has been demonized, but Nietzsche would reclaim it. He would say, be dangerous, not violent, not cruel, but unignorable. A dangerous person is someone who cannot be manipulated, someone whose boundaries are clear, whose presence is sharp, whose words carry weight because they are not spoken to please. To become dangerous is to reclaim your edges, to stop explaining yourself, to let your no be final and your yes be sovereign. But true danger also carries integrity. It never seeks to harm. It simply refuses to lie. It refuses to shrink, because a person who owns their power does not need to prove it. Learning to say no without shame. The nice person always says yes to favors, to apologies they don't mean, to people they don't trust. But every false yes is a betrayal, a quiet death of self. Nietzsche would say, your no is sacred. It is the sound of your spine, the moment your will to power speaks. And yet you've been taught to feel guilty for it, to soften it, to explain it, to turn it into a negotiation. But no does not need a reason. It needs conviction. Every time you say no from a place of truth, you reclaim a piece of yourself. And every time you don't, you lose one. Because the journey from goodness to greatness is paved with choices. And every one of them asks the same question. Will you be nice or will you be real? Resentment is not born from cruelty. It grows in silence, in smiles, in swallowed truths. You think you're being kind, you think you're keeping the peace, but underneath your niceness, a storm begins to brew, a slow, corrosive anger that builds every time you say yes when you mean no. Nietzsche understood this better than anyone. He saw that beneath many gentle faces lies not love, but repressed will, a will too afraid to speak, too conditioned to obey, too nice to be honest, and so the niceness becomes a mask. And the resentment becomes your soul's way of screaming beneath it, the suppressed will to power. Inside every person who plays small, there is a fire. The fire doesn't die, it just waits. It waits behind the smile, behind the quiet agreement, behind the polite words that twist the truth into something more palatable. Nietzsche believed that this fire, the will to power, cannot be eliminated, only denied. But the more you deny it, the more it mutates. It doesn't disappear, it turns inward. It burns in your chest, it whispers in your dreams, it poisons your relationships. And eventually, what once could have been greatness becomes bitterness, because no one can suppress who they are forever without consequence. When suppressed truth turns toxic, you don't explode, you withdraw. You don't scream, you sigh, you disengage, you make subtle jabs cloaked in kindness. That's the toxicity of suppressed truth. It doesn't look dramatic, it looks quiet, passive, controlled, but it's just as destructive because it erodes intimacy, it confuses others, it turns relationships into silent wars. Nietzsche would say, the truth you're afraid to speak is the poison you'll eventually feed to the people you claim to love. When you're too nice to be honest, you become dangerous in the worst way. Not openly, but secretly. Not intentionally, but inevitably. Because resentment always finds a way to speak, even if your mouth doesn't. Why niceness breeds resentment? You think the world will reward your compliance. That if you give enough, stay soft enough, sacrifice enough, people will love you. But often they just expect more. And as they take your time, your energy, your silence, you begin to feel it. That heavy bitterness, the anger at them for asking, but even more the anger at yourself for always saying yes. This is how niceness turns to resentment. Not because others are cruel, but because you've trained them to believe your boundaries don't exist. Nietzsche saw this dynamic not as a flaw, but as a strategy gone wrong. You traded honesty for approval, and resentment is the interest on that debt. Reclaiming honesty as a sacred act. The cure for resentment is not more kindness, it is truth, not brutal, not careless, but uncompromising. When you speak your truth, even when your voice shakes, you begin to return to yourself. When you say, "I don't agree, that doesn't work for me, this is who I am," you stop asking the world to guess where your boundaries are. Nietzsche believed in the power of the creator, one who shapes their world through truth, not obedience. You are not here to be agreeable. You are here to be real, to love without disappearing, to give without self-erasure, to be kind, not because you're afraid to be rejected, but because you have nothing to prove. Because when you reclaim your voice, your will, your edges, you don't become cruel, you become clear. There is a kind of soul that does not beg to be liked, that does not shrink to be accepted, that does not trade truth for harmony. It is fierce, but not cruel, kind, but never submissive, soft when it chooses, sharp when it must. Nietzsche's ideal was never the brute, never the cold cynic. It was the creator, the one who rises above resentment and obedience to forge a life rooted in power, in beauty, in truth. This is the fierce soul, the soul that reclaims kindness, not as a disguise, but as a choice, redefining kindness through strength. Most people are kind because they are afraid not to be, because they don't want to be seen as harsh, because they fear being left. But the fierce soul is kind from a different place, a place of overflow. They do not give to be approved of. They give because their cup is full. Their kindness does not weaken them. It confirms their strength. This is the kindness that commands respect, that holds its shape, that doesn't disappear under pressure, and it begins the moment you stop being nice to survive and start being kind from power, speaking truth with courage, not cruelty. You don't have to yell to be real. You don't have to humiliate to be honest. The fierce soul speaks with clarity, not contempt, with conviction, not aggression. They know the truth is sharp, but it does not need to be thrown like a weapon. Nietzsche would remind you, your courage is not measured by how loud you are, but by how clear you're willing to be when silence would keep you safe. To speak truth without apology is not an attack. It is an act of love for yourself and for the world you refuse to lie to. Becoming whole, not just liked. You can spend your life being nice, being liked, being accepted, being non-threatening, or you can become whole. Wholeness means carrying all of yourself, the fire and the gentleness, the no and the yes, the rage and the tenderness. Nietzsche's path is not about choosing between strength and kindness. It is about integrating both until your presence speaks even when your mouth is closed. To be whole is to no longer contort yourself for approval. It is to stand, fully inhabited, and let the world respond however it may. Because your task is not to be liked, it is to be true. Building a life that commands respect, not approval. When you stop needing approval, you begin to command respect. Not through force, but through unshakable presence, through boundaries you don't have to explain, through energy that speaks louder than performance ever could. The fierce soul builds a life on this foundation, a life not of apology, but of alignment, a love not of dependency, but of mutual power, a purpose not of pleasing, but of becoming. This is what Nietzsche envisioned. Not a world of polite slaves, but a world of creators. Souls who no longer live to be tolerated, but to be remembered. Stop being nice. Start being real. Niceness is a mask. It wins you approval, but it costs you yourself. You don't need to become hard. You don't need to become cold, but you do need to become clear, grounded, honest, whole. Let go of the need to be liked. Burn the script that keeps you agreeable. Speak the truth even when your voice shakes. Be kind, but never again be small, because the world does not need more nice people. It needs more fierce souls who dare to be real.